My name is Jeff Morgan. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and in the first two videos I've looked at the Duluth model. I've talked a little bit about the feminist theory behind the Duluth model that was actually developed by Ellen Pence, a self-avowed feminist in Duluth, Minnesota. At the time, she really had no qualifications to embark on this type of a study. She had a Bachelor of Arts, but that was it. She had no type of a sociological degree or any type of degree that would actually give her a credence in this, but she was a social activist. And the second video, I talked a little bit about the effectiveness of the Duluth model, or actually what I would say is the ineffectiveness of the Duluth model. Basically, in areas where it's been tested, it has been found to be largely ineffective. And in 2014, a news report even stated that among the Duluth model, there was a 40% recidivism rate within 5 years for people that entered the Batterers Intervention Program based on the Duluth model, versus a 0% recidivism rate within 5 years for a Batterers Intervention Program based on nonviolent communication. So for all intents and purposes, the Duluth model is a failed model, and yet it is actually the model that is followed in 50 states in the United States and also in 17 countries to which it's been imported. So what are the criticisms of the Duluth model? Criticism has been largely centered on the program's insistence that men are perpetrators who are violent. And they are violent because they have been socialized in a patriarchy that condones male violence. Among my friends, among my acquaintances, the people that I know, no one defends domestic violence. No one defends men beating women, nor do they defend, by the way, women beating men. Domestic violence is a two-way street. And there are instances, as we all know, where women are beating men, and if the men were to raise a hand or anything, that man would probably be arrested, even though he may be doing it in self-defense. The Duluth model has said that, number one, men are the perpetrators, women are the victims. So even when women are the perpetrators and men are the victims, the Duluth model says this cannot be. Men are always the perpetrators, women are always the victims. No matter how much she may be beating him, he is still at fault for the whole thing. And this comes to the critics of the Duluth model. One of the criticisms is that the Duluth model actually ignores research linking domestic violence to substance abuse and to psychological abuse, such as attachment disorders, often traced to childhood abuse or neglect, or the absence of a history of adequate socialization and other training. Other people criticize the Duluth model as being overly confrontational rather than therapeutic, focusing on changing the abuser's actions and attitudes rather than dealing with the underlying emotional and psychological issues. There's one professor, he comes out of the University of British Columbia, his name is Donald Dutton. He studied abusive personalities, and he says this: the Duluth model was developed by people who don't understand anything about therapy. This is quite an interesting comment, because there are many people who would say to the most heinous killer, well, maybe we can rehabilitate him. Maybe we can give him therapy. Maybe something could happen. However, when you look at the Duluth model, there basically is no chance of therapy given to the person who is automatically, by default, assumed to be the perpetrator because of the feminist theory that says all men are perpetrators, all women are victims. Donald Dutton also pointed out that lesbian battering is more frequent than heterosexual battering, which creates a very interesting dilemma for the Duluth model. Because if all men are perpetrators and all women are victims, what is this saying about a relationship in which there is a woman and woman? Is anybody a perpetrator? Isn't anybody a victim? Are they both victims? So you have one victim, be it battering another victim. What does this mean? The Duluth model has absolutely nothing to explain this. And then there's also Philip W. Cook, and he points out that in the case of homosexual domestic violence, the patriarchy, which of course is the big enemy because the feminists hate the patriarchy is absent. So there's no male dominance of women in same-sex relationships, yet in fact female on female abuse is reported more than twice as frequently as male on male abuse. Very interesting once again. Furthermore, some critics point out that the model ignores the reality that women are sometimes perpetrators of domestic violence in heterosexual relationships as well. And again, if you go into a family court or if you have a police report that's filed or whatever the case may be, the automatic assumption is the man is the perpetrator, the woman is the victim. Even if the man has been being severely beaten and abused, it does not make a difference, because the Duluth model, which the family law attorneys, which judges, which police officers are all steeped in, says this: women are the victims, men are the perpetrators. A man can be beaten and nothing will take place to help him out in that situation. And yet if he acts in self-defense, he is considered a perpetrator and may find himself prosecuted as such. And by the way, there are many shelters for women and for children of domestic violence, and yet there are no shelters, or very few shelters, for men who are actually victims of domestic violence. Men are supposed to just tough it out on their own, buck up and move on, and yet women, even when there may be no domestic violence whatsoever, can invoke it and have access to shelters and other types of legal aid, often because of the fact that the Duluth model says that women are always victims. However, Ellen Pence herself has written, by determining that the need or desire for power was the motivating force behind battering, so she has stated right here that we have already determined the need or desire for power was the motivating force behind battering. That's her number one, her bottom line assumption. We created a conceptual framework that, in fact, did not fit the lived experience of many men and women we were working with. But do not be deterred by the facts. The Domestic Abuse Intervention Project staff remained undaunted by the difference in our theory and the actual experiences of those we were working with. It was the cases themselves that created the chink in each of our theoretical suits of armor. Speaking for myself, I found that many of the men I interviewed did not seem to articulate a desire for power over their partner. Although I relentlessly took every opportunity to point out to men in the groups that were so motivated and merely in denial, the fact that few men ever articulated such a desire went unnoticed by me and many of my co-workers. Eventually, we realized we were finding what we had already predetermined to find. Facts be damned, she was going to find support for her theory. Even if all the facts were against it, or the majority of them, nevertheless her theory had to stand, and that's what she was going to do. So what are the consequences of this? If you go to a family court, in almost every situation, the presumption is the woman is the victim. Somehow the man, who may have done nothing, who may have been an outstanding citizen, who everybody may know to be a model of gentleness and kindness and everything else, if he is accused of domestic violence, he will be considered guilty. In many instances, if it comes down to a divorce situation, he will lose his children. He may have to have supervised visitation merely because of an allegation of violence which maybe never even existed, because a woman merely said, well, I feel threatened. Therefore, all of the legal system, all of the attorneys, the judges, the police force, they're going to be there to protect the woman, even though she's lying to them. And even the man, even though he may be innocent, will be railroaded and may have his life completely upended. He may lose his job, his career. He may never get to see his kids except under supervised visits. He may be stigmatized by people nearby him that know him better. The people in his church may want to have nothing to do with him because somehow he has been accused of domestic violence. The Duluth model has not proven its effectiveness. Even though it was founded in 1981 and today is 2018, 2019, it has been largely a failed model. And yet this model is what actually governs the proceedings of family court hearings. This model is in the back of the mind of family court judges. This model is what the police have in the back of their mind when they respond to a domestic incident. Somehow the man is the perpetrator, the woman is the victim, and even though he may be innocent, the burden is upon him to prove that he is innocent. There's very little chance of doing that. The ramifications to his life can be horrendous. Again, he can lose his kids, he can end up being imprisoned falsely. In fact, when I was accused of this and was later found to be completely innocent, my attorney told me, you would be shocked at how many innocent men sit in jail due to false allegations of women. Thank you.